Thank you very much. So I work with Teagasc, which is the research authority for agriculture in Ireland. And my study was about the validation of a commercially available automated body condition scoring system. So this, we think, would be the first case where a commercially available system has been independently validated. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Lorenzo Leso, who started this study, Frank Buckley, John Keneally, Diarmaid McSweeney, and Lawrence Chalou. So just to give a bit of an overview of why what body condition scoring is and why it's important. It's a subjective assessment of body fat percentage of a cow. Change in body condition score predicts performance of cows and influences management, particularly in relation to transition period and subsequent fertility and complications associated with it. Body condition scoring is subjective, it is time-consuming, and requires trained personnel. And there may be issues as well about how consistent it is within the same score and between scores. And this might be particularly relevant in research contexts if there's scoring going on by different assessors. For this reason, automated systems promise many advantages. So just an illustration, a reminder, I presume, for most of people what a low body condition score cow looks like on top. So you can see the ribs are visible. The back curvature from the rear view is curved, and on the bottom we have a overconditioned cow, and you can see that the back is flat, relatively flat from the rear view. Ideally, cows that were in either state would be detected before the transition period and managed in such a way that this was corrected to reduce the risk of complications later on. So what was the tool used? The tool was called the BodyMat F. F is for fixed, which means it was, in this case, fixed over the drafting gate at the exit of the milking parlour. They have portable versions as well. It is a 3D time-of-flight sensor, and it takes an image of the cow's back and can then determine the shape of the cow, and then using a proprietary algorithm estimates the body condition score in real time using deep learning or machine learning techniques. This technology has the potential to give other information, not just body condition score. For example, it could give an estimate of body weight, linear measures which might be important for breeding purposes, and maybe an indication of locomotion score looking at back arch, for example. Though that, of course, would be for only severe cases of lameness. So here's kind of an illustration of some of the data that might be collected, or some of the images that can be generated using this technology. So to the study. We had 105 Holstein Friesian cows that were grazing and in a seasonal calving pattern. The gold standard in this study was 2 trained observers. And one of the complications we had is not only is body condition score subjective, it's also measured in different ways around the world. And the BMF output was on a 0 to 5 scale used in France. So the first step was to calculate or figure out how we should convert this output to the scale used in Ireland, the 1 to 5 scale. So we split the sample of cows in half, so stratified by parity and locomotion score, as measured by the human observers. And we used 49 of the cows to develop a way of converting the data. So the first result would be, how do we convert between the French scale and the Irish scale? We took 2 different approaches. We took a simple linear regression. So you can see this was the equation that we got, and this was the R squared achieved on the top. And we also thought that there might be a nonlinear association between the scales. And so we took a decision tree approach. And you can see that the input is on the 0 to 5 scale, and then this decision tree illustrates how it would be converted to the Irish scale on the bottom row. So to illustrate the data that we had to now assess the accuracy of the BodyMat F, we have score 1 on the top left, we have score 2 on the top middle, and on the right we have the mean of the 2 scores. And in this case, we only have data from when the scores scored the cows on during the same week. So it's truncated there towards the end. They didn't line up their scoring within the same weeks, unfortunately. Down the bottom left, we can see the output of the conversion from the BMF using the decision tree approach. So we can see there that there's essentially 6 potential options using this decision tree approach. And then in the bottom middle, we see the linear output, which gives a more perhaps natural outcome. So first of all, how consistent were the different sources of data? So what was the within-cow standard deviation from month to month? So for this case, we looked at 2 different comparisons, so from April to May and from May to June. And we can see that score 1 and score 2 had similar reliability, so the standard deviation was quite low. So the smallest unit on the scale would be 0.25, and we can see that the standard deviation within cow was about 0.1. If we get the average of the 2 human observers, we can see that that drops, indicating that this is a perhaps more reliable measure than either of the observers alone. And finally, we see the output from the automated system, which is again lower, again indicating that this system was more consistent in the scores it gave a cow from month to month. So, how often were the different methods disagreeing with each other? So we have 2 thresholds here, so greater than 0.125, which again would be halfway along this 0.25 scale or increment that the human observers would use. And we have 0.375, which would be, I suppose, a difference for the human observers of 0.5 of a body condition score. What we can see is that the 2 human observers were not in complete agreement more than half of the time, so that there was generally, more often than not, at least 1 increment difference in the score assigned to cows. We can see so there that the difference is in 3% of the time there was a difference of more than 2 increments. If we now look at the mean of the 2 human observers compared to the decision tree approach, we can see that the BMF was in disagreement with the mean of the human observers 40% of the time at the smaller interval, and the linear approach was in disagreement by at least 1 unit 46% of the time. So the next measure is about agreement. So in what kind of measure can we give to say how well these sources of data are in agreement? Concordance of correlation is quite similar to a Pearson correlation, except it penalizes for when the slope of the line of best fit differs. And so this is a more appropriate statistical measure for agreement analysis. And we can see that the 2 human observers were had a correlation there of 0.69. We can see that score 1 was in lower agreement with both BMF outputs compared to score 2. And we can see that the mean of the 2 human observers was in similar or greater agreement with the BMF as between the 2 human observers. So we have, I guess the important things here is to say that the gold standard would be to compare the 2 human observers, and we can see, depending on whether you use the decision tree approach or the linear approach, we get a very similar level of agreement. So in summary, the BMF measures body condition score to a similar or greater accuracy as trained observers. Regular automated body condition scoring is likely to have value for farmers and maybe perhaps more so even for researchers. And on the research farm where this is installed, I expect in the next 12 months or so we may discontinue manual body condition scoring because it seems to be as good, and we would have usually daily or maybe even twice daily data coming in for the body condition score. I'd like to acknowledge Andrea Biondi, the main contact at Ingenera, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening to the presentation, and any questions that would be appreciated.
Thank you very much for